Good evening. I'm Kiki Jameson, President of the Fund for New Jersey. On behalf of the Fund and all our co-sponsor partners, thank you for joining us tonight for the sixth and final installment of Imagine More, Racial Justice Begins with Us. Building Political Power of the Most Impacted is the culminating event of our virtual series that brings together many of the themes we've already discussed. Despite New Jersey's progressive reputation, our state has done very little to ensure engagement and participation from all of its residents, especially our diverse communities. That's why we're fortunate to have an exceptional panel of experts joining us tonight to discuss solutions for building power among those least represented and most impacted. Tonight, our goal is to offer some hope and pathways to change in these difficult times. Imagine More is a first of its kind 6-part series of events that brings together national thought leaders, philanthropic and community-based organizations, academic institutions, healthcare leaders, policy advocates, jurists, and community organizers from across the ideological spectrum, all united around a common purpose: advancing racial justice and repairing the harmful impacts of systemic racism. Throughout this series, we've heard from change makers who have offered action plans for making concrete changes in wealth distribution, the criminal legal system, housing, education, and health. And while each session focused on a different topic, we recognize that all of these issues are interconnected. And that's why our speakers also propose solutions to repair the harm caused by all of these injustices. Additionally, following each event, you've received resources and information to connect you with the organizations that are doing this important work and to guide you in leading change in your communities. We launched Imagine More in February, and we're enormously proud that over 2,200 people from all across the state have registered for and watched our series, demonstrating that not only do they understand the urgent need to address racial injustice, but that they also want to help. Tonight, we're challenging New Jersey to ensure that everyone has a voice in the political process, especially those who have been historically denied or ignored. So welcome to the sixth and final event, Building Political Power of the Most Impacted. We're going to start things off a little differently this time. While there are over 150 languages spoken across our state, New Jersey does not require state documents to be translated, locking up many residents from participating. That's why our first presentation of the evening will be delivered in Spanish to illustrate the language barrier that many New Jerseyans face on a daily basis. However, you will be able to listen to the presentation in English, and I will share how shortly. We're delighted to present Diana Mejia, co-founder of Wind of the Spirit. Diana will help us to understand the current realities surrounding New Jersey's immigrant communities and domestic workers, and what can be done to repair the harms caused by structural racism. Diana's remarks will be followed by a presentation by Charlene D. Walker, Executive Director of Faith in New Jersey. Charlene will speak to us about the importance of grassroots community leaders, as well as multiracial and multicultural coalitions aimed at increasing equity and dismantling systems of inequality. Diana and Charlene will then be joined by Richard W. Roper, Chair of the Board of the Fund for New Jersey, who will moderate an interactive discussion with tonight's speakers and will include questions from you, the audience. Now, I'm delighted to present Diana. As I mentioned, her presentation will be in Spanish, so if you would like to listen to it in English, please click on the interpretation globe icon located at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select English from the drop-down menu. If you're viewing this program from your phone, then click on the More icon with the 3 dots at the bottom of your phone's Zoom screen to select the language you prefer. And now, welcome, Diana Mejia. Bienvenidas, Diana.
Muy buenas tardes, muchas gracias. Construir el poder político de los más afectados. Quiero primero que todo agradecer al Fund for New Jersey por impulsar esta iniciativa, buscando realmente promover conversaciones honestas que a veces pueden hacernos sentir incómodos, pero que son necesarias para juntos construir el New Jersey que estamos imaginando. Un New Jersey donde todas y todos podamos vivir con dignidad, reconociendo nuestras diferencias y buscando las oportunidades para poder celebrar nuestra humanidad. Quiero reconocer en esta presentación a cada una de las mujeres y hombres inmigrantes que cada día construyen a New Jersey y que aún debido a la falta de voluntad política se mantienen en el anonimato, muchos de los cuales después de 20 años de lucha lograron tener una licencia de manejar. Qué vergüenza, ¿no? Una cosa tan básica y lógica nos costó 20 años pasar en la legislatura de New Jersey. Y es así como construimos el poder político de los más afectados. Esa mayoría global que es la minoría en asuntos de recursos y oportunidades. 20 años de lucha solamente para pasar algo básico en New Jersey. Llegué a los Estados Unidos el 27 de febrero de 1991. Para noviembre del mismo año, mi hermano menor fue torturado, asesinado y desaparecido. Salí de limpiar la última casa del día. Y al llegar al lugar, el cuarto donde vivía, recibí la noticia. Salí y empecé a caminar. Caminé y caminé. Cuando me di cuenta, ya era de noche. No alcanzaba a imaginar a mi mamá y a mi papá reconociendo a mi hermano en esa fosa común donde lo tiraron. Para el año 2000, cuando nació Wind of the Spirit, ya teníamos en nuestras espaldas muchas de esas historias de muerte, violaciones, explotación, y como personas de fe, un grupo nos juntamos, reconociendo que teníamos la responsabilidad de participar de la política en el sentido clásico de la palabra, organizarnos para buscar el bien común, promoviendo la participación abierta de todas las personas, especialmente de aquellas impactadas, porque solo estas pueden ser los actores y actoras del cambio que necesitamos. En Wind of the Spirit hemos aprendido que solo educándonos, organizándonos y movilizándonos podemos lograr lo que queremos, que es importante ver los asuntos de una forma holística y reconocer la interseccionalidad de las cosas usando un marco de derechos humanos para esta lucha. También hemos aprendido que tenemos que persistir y resistir, porque el sistema puede ser muy cruel con los pobres y lo está haciendo cruel en New Jersey. Que usar el marco de trabajo de los derechos humanos no es solo una herramienta, sino una necesidad, porque somos seres humanos integrales y no podemos ser solo vistos por un solo lente, por un solo asunto. Hemos aprendido que si nosotros no lo hacemos por nosotros mismos, nadie lo va a hacer por nosotros. Que hay muchas marañas en los juegos políticos y hay muchos compromisos para jugarse el futuro de las comunidades. Que hay muchas cosas que se sobreponen a los intereses de las comunidades, poniendo por encima los intereses de los poderosos que están muchas veces por encima del interés del pueblo. Hemos aprendido que nos han hecho tener miedo a tener poder, porque si somos poderosos, al final del día somos peligrosos. Hemos aprendido también que el sistema nos quiere dividir, pero que juntos tenemos la responsabilidad de construir una sociedad mejor, un New Jersey mejor. Y nosotros, las personas de fe, tenemos una responsabilidad más grande de participar activamente en la construcción de comunidades sostenibles, de comunidades donde los derechos humanos de todas y todos se cumplan y se celebren. En New Jersey tenemos un reto grande por la profunda desigualdad en que vivimos entre pobres, ricos, documentados, indocumentados, blancos, negros, indígenas, por tantos intereses encontrados de aquellos que tienen el poder, por tantos intereses de aquellos que quieren hablar por nosotros como si fuéramos mudos. En New Jersey tenemos el reto de escuchar más a las necesidades de la comunidad, de escuchar más a las necesidades de la gente. Como decía Kiki al principio, cada uno de nosotros tiene una voz. Las comunidades tenemos voces, no somos mudas, pero necesitamos quien nos escuche y realmente necesitamos que las personas que han sido elegidas sean responsables de responder al pueblo y a las comunidades por las necesidades que tienen. La lección más importante que les quiero dejar esta noche es que es posible y que no podemos dejar que nadie nos mate la esperanza ni nos mate nuestros sueños. Todavía sigue siendo posible ser solidarios, entender de los asuntos que le conciernen a las comunidades donde vivimos. Es posible escuchar las necesidades de las personas con quienes interactuamos. Es posible escribir cartas a los medios de comunicación para apoyar o cuestionar un asunto que nos interese. Es posible salir de nuestras casas, de nuestros sitios de trabajo y caminar por los derechos humanos de la comunidad en la que somos parte. Hay esperanza y la esperanza es la idea más importante para nosotros en el sentido de que no podemos ser víctimas ni dejarnos victimizar. Nuestras comunidades ya han sido victimizadas bastante por un abuso sistemático. Ya hemos sido victimizadas y esto tiene que cambiar. Cuando hablamos de reparación, hablamos de una visión holística, de ver cómo todos los asuntos y todas las personas se interconectan. Estamos hablando de oportunidades nuevas para todos los residentes en New Jersey. Estamos hablando de oportunidades nuevas para las comunidades de color. Estamos hablando de oportunidades nuevas para los negros, para los indígenas, para los latinos. Estamos hablando de oportunidades nuevas para los indocumentados y las indocumentadas en New Jersey, que estamos contribuyendo y aportando con el Estado. Estamos hablando de imaginar un New Jersey donde todos podamos celebrar que somos seres humanos y que tenemos dignidad, y que todos podemos tener oportunidades y que todos podemos abrir puertas a la misma vez que podemos cerrar. Entonces, poco a poco, paso a paso, nosotros estamos reconociendo que tenemos que cambiar nuestro lenguaje y nuestra praxis. No podemos seguir solamente hablando de cambios, pero tenemos que ser activos en esos cambios. Tenemos que tener una praxis liberadora. Tenemos que buscar oportunidades para que todos y todas en New Jersey podamos seguir contribuyendo. En Wind of the Spirit, por ejemplo, nosotros llevamos 22 años de lucha. Somos muy orgullosos porque todos y todas en Wind of the Spirit somos personas impactadas directamente por el fenómeno de migración. Somos personas que estamos contribuyendo. Nuestra organización es un ejemplo de cómo muchas otras organizaciones de base están luchando para contribuir en New Jersey. Estamos educándonos, estamos tratando de ver cómo construimos puentes para que todas y todas podamos entendernos y podamos comúnmente celebrar a un New Jersey pleno en derechos, pleno en derechos humanos. Estamos trabajando para pasar el acta de confianza. Estamos trabajando para que más personas tengan acceso a un permiso de trabajo a través del TPS. Estamos trabajando por una reforma integral a nivel nacional porque es realmente éticamente inmoral que tengamos casi medio siglo donde personas todavía siguen indocumentadas y donde en nuestro estado no estemos pasando leyes que realmente puedan favorecer a todas las comunidades impactadas. Nuestro llamado hoy, una vez más, es a la solidaridad. Nuestro llamado, una vez más, es a una hermandad integral de seres humanos. Nuestro llamado, una vez más, es a recordar que no hay seres humanos ilegales, que no hay ilegales, que hay personas que seguimos trabajando y contribuyendo en este país. Y nuestro llamado, una vez más, es a trabajar juntos, para juntos seguir imaginando un New Jersey equitativo, un New Jersey donde hay esperanza, un New Jersey donde no nos tengamos que avergonzar porque hay esas brechas tan grandes por clases, por raza, por situación migratoria. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Deanna, for that powerful introduction. In preparation for Charlene's presentation, which will be delivered in English, again, please click on the globe icon listed, located at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select your preferred language. And now, here is Charlene D. Walker. Welcome, Charlene.
Hello, Kiki and everyone. Thank you so much to the Fund for New Jersey for having me here tonight. I am going to share some slides with all of you. I'm very excited for this conversation. So I want to ground us a little bit, first and foremost. If we're going to begin talking about building the power of those that are most impacted, we have to be willing to speak some truth to power. And the truth is, an unaccountable decision maker is a dangerous decision maker. I'm going to say that again. An unaccountable decision maker is a dangerous decision maker. See, they make decisions about our lives that hurt each and every one of us. As a Black woman, I have spent my entire life under attack due to white supremacy and corporate capitalism, which is maintained by decision makers unaccountable to the people that they serve. I was born to a teen mother who had just gotten into college, and due to the wealth gap and lack of resources, she immediately put me up for adoption. I was lucky. I was adopted to a loving foster mother, and I went to a home that was filled with love, but it was also filled with Black and brown children that were taken away from their families due to the war on drugs or due to the lack of investment and treatment for Black and brown families that were under the crack epidemic at the time. I grew up in a tiny town, only 2.7 square miles, that had been redlined so badly and segregated that I lived under policing, where the first time that I was stopped by a police officer, I was 7 years old walking to the library because 2 Black children shouldn't be walking anywhere together. Our school system was segregated because of the redlining that actually happened, which meant myself in 5th grade, our schools were forced to desegregate. New Jersey fought desegregating my school system all the way up to the New Jersey Supreme Court. I know what it's like to wake up late at night and to wait for a loved one to come home from the community and for them never to appear because their community had been stripped by so many resources. Affordable housing wasn't there, and there were no opportunities. Gun violence runs rampant, not because people choose it, but because political decision makers have chosen to strip us of everything. I know what it's like living as a Black woman in this country to go through a medical system that doesn't love us. I've lost my mother and my son because their lives did not matter. Their Black bodies did not matter. I could go on and on, but I tell pieces of my story because I think we need to understand that they are all connected and it is the same system. When one of us bleeds, we all bleed. It doesn't matter if you're Black or white or brown, you're all impacted. And that is why I'm on a mission to make sure that a multiracial democracy actually works. That multiracial democracy is committed to uprooting white supremacy and making sure that we actually build the beloved community. So we must build the political power of those that are most impacted. And the path forward that I see is through making sure that we build power when power vehicles like Faith in New Jersey that are actually dedicated to this long, hard work. I believe that justice begins at our intersections and it's rooted in our relationships. What that means for me is that if we are going to have a multiracial democracy that fights to uproot and repair the harm that has been done, we must actually have conversations with each other and build relationships. Through those relationships, we will see all of the harm that has been done to Black people, how it in fact impacts every single person, regardless of your race. Because I believe when Black people are free, everyone will be free. That includes our Indigenous loved ones, Asian Americans, Asians, Indigenous folks, Latinos, and everyone. So how do we do it? Oftentimes, people show up as activists, and we need activists. We love activists. They show up as individuals, and something inside of them tells them that these systems have been impacted them in such a way that they need to show up and try and make change. The other way we show up is through mobilizing. Mobilizing is when people show up as a tactic to bring about change as part of an actual campaign. But what we need to do for the deep-rooted systems that are hurting and harming each and every one of us in this state is we need to lean into organizing. Organizing is about developing the leadership of others so they can make collective change. That's the long work. That's the hard work that we must do if we are actually going to build a multiracial democracy. There are so many things up against us. Deanna spoke of several bills and pieces of legislation that are important. There are so many others that are right before us. As you can see on the national landscape, there is an active attack on our voting rights. Every single day, people are trying to take away our right to vote. I know personally that my right to vote was almost stripped away from me in the state of New Jersey. In the 2020 election, I was about to go cast my vote, and something told me a few weeks before to double check and make sure my registration was active. And when I went in, I was deactivated, even though I was voted in every single election. That is why I think it is super important that we pass same-day voter registration. Because there are many people just like me that would show up on voting day and not be able to cast their ballot. Also, one of the things that is hurting so many of us is the fact that many people cannot come home due to the urban gun violence that is plaguing our communities. But the problem with this is that we know what works. There are great organizations that are on the ground that are caring for our people. But the state of New Jersey continues to never fund us to full scale. We have hospital-based violence intervention programs, on-the-ground community-based violence intervention programs. Yet we would rather over-police us and pour us into the criminal legal system, when for a fraction of the cost, we could actually begin to heal our communities and bring them opportunities. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to come together across race, across class. So, and across age. That means bringing together everyday people who are closest to the hurt that understand exactly what the solution is. They have the answers. It means showing up even when we don't want to. And it means for faith communities to show up in ways in which might be uncomfortable in the public square, because we believe that we are called to be prophets of the resistance and not chaplains to the empire. That means it is not our job as people of faith to congeal or to make decision makers feel well and happy. It is our job to speak truth to power and to make sure that the pain of our people makes it into the public square so that we can start to mobilize and organize in order to bring about change. Because when that happens, each and every one of us will start to live in a world that we know is possible. Thank you so very much for letting me share just a little.
Charlene, thank you very much for those important and foundational remarks. It is my pleasure now to introduce tonight's moderator, Richard Roper, the chair of the board of the Fund for New Jersey. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Kiki. It's my pleasure to be here with you all this evening to close out the Imagine More Racial Justice Begins With Us event series and to moderate this urgent discussion on building political power of the most impacted in New Jersey. We have much to cover this evening, so without further ado, let's meet our distinguished panel. We've already met Diana Mejia. In addition to co-founding Wind of the Spirit some 20 years ago, Diana advocates every day for humane and just policies that allow immigrants to live with dignity and contribute fully to their communities. Her work has recently been recognized with the 2022 Russ Berry Making a Difference Award. Thank you very much for joining us, Diana. We also met our speaker and executive director of Faith in New Jersey, Charlene D. Walker. Charlene is a New Jersey native and a powerful woman of God, with a consistent record of fiercely advocating for racial, immigrant, economic, and social justice. She challenges leaders and institutions to better unite our social movements and to work towards dismantling systems of hate and oppression. Thank you for being with us, Charlene. Rounding out tonight's panel is Ai-jen Poo. President of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Ai-jen is a next generation labor leader, award-winning organizer, author, and a leading voice in the women's movement. She is a nationally recognized expert on elder and family care, the future of work, gender equality, immigration, narrative change, and grassroots organizing. It is a distinct pleasure to have you with us tonight, Ai-jen. Okay, we've got to get started. I've got a series of questions that I want each of you to respond to as you see fit. The first question is for all three of you, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to ask you to be as tight in your responses as you possibly can, keeping in mind that we do have a timetable. The first question, as I said, is for all of you. Can you elaborate on one issue or law that contributes to New Jersey's inequitable political system and one policy solution we can embrace? Ai-jen, would you begin for us, please?
I was hoping that Deanna would begin because she is my leader in New Jersey.
All right, Deanna, you can lead. Yep. Unmute, Deanna. There you go.
Okay, so regarding what you question in New Jersey, I'm reading again the question. So I think the issues in New Jersey, political issues, we actually working on specifically, and it's urgent for us, is the domestic bill of rights. It's very important for us to pass in New Jersey. Many of community members are domestic workers, but also many of you probably in this webinar, in this presentation, in this series, your lives has been impact for a caregiver, a nanny, a domestic worker. So that is very important for us. So when we say inequality, system and policies, I think immigrant communities has been faced so many challenges in New Jersey. Regarding with the basic needs that we have, housing is another need, education is another need, political participation. Just because you don't have a social security number doesn't mean you cannot participate openly and actively in the community, in communities activism and community change. So it's so important for us in New Jersey to recognize that. We definitely need to move and improve quality of life for New Jerseyans, for people of color, the global majority, Black and brown, immigrants with papers or no papers, indigenous communities, immigrants. We came from we're not only Latinos, we are from all over the world. And it's important to recognize that. And so I will summarize there are so many issues and policies that we need to improve and move in New Jersey.
Thank you, Deanna. That was very, very helpful. Charlene, why don't you step in for a moment?
Hi, I'm right with Deanna. There are so many things that we really are up against. It's almost overwhelming to name just one. One thing I do want to bring up is that I think that we don't have moral budgets in New Jersey, and budgets are a true reflection of our values. If you look on the local level, state level, we still have yet to embrace our values in a true way. And due to that, I believe it contributes to our economic disparities. It contributes to funding the prison industrial pipeline, like the whole system. It also disenfranchises our vote, which I think is super important when we're looking at trying to make sure that people are included and that their voices are actually being heard. So policy-wise, one of the things that I would like to see passed expeditiously is same-day voting, and making sure that we, instead of restricting our vote, that we're actually expanding our democracy in such a way that people can be included. And that includes from same-day voting to making sure that it's easy to find out when elections are. In the state of New Jersey, it is extremely difficult in certain regions to find out if there's even going to be an election. Not to mention the fact that we have one of the most horrible ballot designs through the line ballot, which disenfranchises voters and sets up a system that really props up political bosses in order to maintain their power.
Thank you, Charlene. I think you two, Deanna and Charlene, have covered the territory reasonably well. So I'm going to ask Ai-jen to respond to this. Why is it important to center people, not issues, in this work? Ai-jen?
Well, thank you so much, Richard, for the question. And I might start by just building off of what Deanna and Charlene just said about New Jersey policy, and say that, a lot of people don't know this history. But in the 1930s, when Congress was discussing the New Deal, which was supposed to really establish a social contract and a framework, especially for labor rights in our country, Southern members of Congress refused to support the labor law provisions, including the Fair Labor Standards Act, which would offer the right to minimum wage and overtime protections for workers, and the National Labor Relations Act, which would establish the right to organize and form a union, the Social Security Act. Southern members of Congress wouldn't support those laws if they included farm workers and domestic workers who were Black workers at the time. And so in a racist exclusionary move, Congress moved ahead with those laws and excluded those two groups of workers because they conceded to Southern Dixiecrats who didn't want Black workers to have equal protections under the law. And that exclusion really set the tone for how domestic workers and farm workers would be treated in our law and policy, in our culture. And when more immigrants started to do this work, they were treated with that was the imprint of the treatment and the relegation to second-class worker status that they inherited. And that is why when Deanna talks about the New Jersey Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, it is so important and historic, because not only does it protect a group of workers who are majority women of color, overwhelmingly women, majority women of color to this day, and support a growing workforce who provide services that we all increasingly need more of. But it is about addressing a historic racial inequity and exclusion that has really shaped the lives of millions of women of color who have done this work and contributed so much to this country, to our families, to the economy. This is about saying New Jersey recognizes the work that makes all other work possible, that these women of color and immigrant women do every day as a profession and to support their kids. The same goes in the budget, right? Women of color have always been disproportionately represented in the care economy, child care, elder care, home care, long-term care. And these jobs have always been poverty wage jobs. And it is rooted in this historic legacy of slavery and racial exclusion that we have so devalued this work. But it turns out, as we've all seen in the COVID pandemic, this is essential work. This is essential to
Very
our
much so.
safety, to our health, and our well-being. And yet the workers earn poverty wages and can't take care of themselves or their own families. And our state budgets undervalue this work, right? And we have a choice that we can make to fully fund childcare, to fully fund home and community-based services, and make sure that the rates for wages for workers are fair, living wage rates where people can get access to benefits. And so when we say putting people at the center, it's really about making sure that our laws and policies are about improving quality of life and quality of work for everyone. That is what they are meant to be. And I think centering the people who have been excluded for the longest helps us design policies that make sure that no one person is left behind.
Thank you, Arjen. That was very, very helpful. Deanna, I have another question for you, and that has to do with why is it important to take a holistic approach to advocacy and organizing work?
I would like to build in from the what was comment before, and it's important because people is at the center of anything. Even start from your household. You need what you need. You know what you need. You know what is happening in your community. So it's very important to take a holistic approach because we're not a just one need. We are a whole as one human being needs housing, education, healthcare, participation, the right to be able to enjoy life, fair wages, so many things one person has. So it's important not just only to see an issue, but see the person and what are the needs that person has. That is very, very important for anything we do. It's also important to take a holistic approach because we need to listen. We need to listen what are the people need, what people says, what the community says. It's important because people can also advocate by themselves. People can organize by themselves. We just need to have the opportunities to be able to engage in campaigns, to engage in our communities. We need to have the opportunity to fully participate. We need to have the opportunity to be that voice. So in this, I will say also in general, is the work we do in New Jersey is definitely using the human rights framework because we believe by having the human rights framework, we definitely can target, can accomplish the New Jersey we are imagined by really meet the needs of in any community.
Thank you, Deanna. That's very helpful. Charlene, how do you build power through voting? How do you build power through voting?
That's a great question. I think that there is this myth, and sometimes it's a little accurate, right? That your vote doesn't matter. But the truth is our vote can be our currency. It's also part of how we do civic engagement. It's not a one-time go cast your ballot. Civic engagement should be 365 days a year, right? It means that we're engaging our legislators, our decision makers, that we're talking to them. And honestly, decision makers think of you as a vote. So it's important to do it as a block and to be engaged as a block of people. And that's how you wield your vote. That's how you wield power. It means something different when I'm having a meeting with a legislator and there are 200 congregations in the room. That is 200 congregations and 200 congregations votes, right? And people vote not for legislators. And I think that that's another thing that we have to dispel. Oftentimes people that are doing this work and that are organizing sometimes are pushing people to go cast a ballot for an individual. We cast our ballots for the things that matter for us. We cast our ballots for our values and for the issues that we have. And that's how we build our power, by being very clear on what it is that's going to move us and making sure that individuals understand that this is the currency that I'm using.
Thanks, Charlene. That's on point, very much on point. Arjen, how do you sustain organizing efforts, given the importance of such grouped activity, collaborations, if you will, given the track record that you have established at a national level in terms of sustaining organizing efforts? Tell us a little bit about how you do that.
You got to win.
I understand that.
You know what? People like to win, and everyday people deserve to see progress, and it's our job as organizers to help make that progress possible. And look, I believe that it's the acts of courage on the part of everyday people who work together that ultimately changes the course of history every time. And sometimes it looks like a very small step forward, not at all what we deserve, right? I mean, so many of our campaigns are just a tiny fraction of what our communities actually deserve. But we owe it to ourselves and our communities to make as much progress as we can, as often as we can. And I'll tell you what, it feels so good to win. And it feels much better to win something small than nothing at all. And so, yeah, and even when we fight and we don't win the actual policy goal, we oftentimes have built relationships and we have built power and we have built visibility, and we need to claim all of that as wins. And so part of our job as organizers, I think, is to absolutely deliver the win, but also to frame every single bit of progress we're making through our collective action and claim it and own it and have it give us the confidence to continue to move forward and never be complacent, but always move forward.
Terrific. That's comprehensive, and it's very much on point. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I have one question more that I'd like each of you to respond to with a couple of sentences each, if you will. And that is, how can our audience get involved in building political power for the most impacted? Deanna, we'll start with you. 2 sentences.
Be persistent. Educate yourselves about the issues that are important for the people around you. Don't be indifferent. We need to listen, and we just cannot close our eyes. Don't be afraid to feel uncomfortable about something. Just stay forward in trying to support something. It's important to have small wins, but also we need to resist in trying to get the whole enchilada, because it's important for us. We keep failing, and people, we keep failing, but we're learning by failing, and we're getting strong. But also we need to say enough is enough. We need to stand up for our rights. We need to get out our place to work. We really need to struggle for what we need and let people know what we need.
Thanks,
And
Deanna.
demanding.
All right, Charlene, 2 sentences. How can our audience get involved in building political power for the most impacted?
First and foremost, I think it's important to join a power vehicle, a power organization that is invested in your leadership. Like Faith in New Jersey, we develop political strategists out of everyday people to build power collectively around our shared issues and interests, to build the world that we know yet can be, but we have imagined it so that we're going forward together. I think that that's most important if we're going to build political power together. So let's walk together and lean in to the uncomfortability that's necessary to make change.
Terrific. Thanks, Charlene. All right, Ajin.
1, call your state representatives to support the New Jersey Domestic Workers Bill of Rights.
Good beginning.
2, call your congressional delegation to support the federal Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. And there's going to be a hearing, a historic first ever hearing about the federal Domestic Workers Bill of Rights in the House Ed and Labor Committee next Thursday. And so if you want to tune in and support domestic workers who will be testifying, you can tune in next Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern to the House Ed and Labor Committee hearing about domestic workers.
Terrific. Very much on point. All right. Thank my panelists. I want to thank you for answering my questions. And now I want to turn to the audience to receive questions that they might want to pose. Please use the Q&A feature to ask our panelists your questions. While you do that, we'll start with audience questions that were submitted during registration, the first of which is, what is the best way to survey the interests and concerns of the local community in which I live? And I'm going to ask Charlene to lead that.
I'm going to say the local community gets together, comes up with the questions, and then figures out what the mechanism is in which they want to actually listen to each other. You can do it through house meetings, just sitting around your coffee table, at the kitchen counter. You can do it at your congregation. You can do door knocking, but mostly you can do it one-on-one. It's those individual relationships, and be brave when you're asking your questions and really listen to each other to get to know each other, not just something that's transactional about an issue, but really about the person, and use open-ended questions when you're talking to people. Because a lot of times, sometimes we think we know what's going on, but when you use open-ended questions, you get to the heart of really what's keeping people up at night. They'll let you know.
Terrific. I'm going to ask, I think I'll ask, let's see, Deanna. It's infuriating to continue seeing legislation aimed at disenfranchising people. How can we counter bad policy and bad politicians?
We definitely need to be challenged then. We need to run accountability sessions. We have to, they keep saying we need to negotiate. We have been negotiating for years, the future of communities, the future of people in our communities. So we really need to stop that, and the legislators need to be more brave. It's time we go in there and they say, well, it's not the time. So it's not the time now. When it's going to be the time? It's easy for you when you have everything you need to see. Now is not the time. Just wait for the next term, and you have to start all over again a campaign. So we really need to be brave in the sense of we need to challenge legislators. And we need to, even though I represent a community that many of us, we're not able to vote because all the citizenship barriers that we have, because has been not a change in immigration, but we are influencers. We work for many people, they definitely agree with us. So we also need to build an alliance with people, and we need to convince people who love us, to our friends of the immigrant community, to really vote in an agenda that really advance community investment, community future. So definitely what I will say is we need to keep challenge, and we need to ask questions, and we need to make politicians and elected officials uncomfortable, because it's ethically immoral the way they keep communities of color oppressed.
Thanks, Deanna. That was very much on point. Ajin, how can young people gain the skills to successfully run for office or come up with policies that will benefit their communities?
Great question. There is an organization called Run for Something that supports young people under the age of 35 who are interested in exploring a run for office. So check out Run for Something. And then when it comes to policy, there isn't one single place to go, but there are lots of different kinds of policy organizations with different kinds of expertise, and some different policy networks. I know, for example, the EARN network socializes a lot of economic policy. So unfortunately, there's not like a one-stop shop place to go for all policies if you want to run for office, but organizations like ours, mine, can be a resource for everything having to do with care, childcare, paid leave, long-term care, workers' rights, care workers' rights, domestic workers' rights, things like that. So you may have to find different organizations in New Jersey who can support you on the specific kinds of policies, but we are out here. There's no reason why anybody has to do anything from scratch or alone, because there are so many resources, and you know who can help you find them is the organization that organized today's panel. So Richard can tell you more about that.
All right, thanks a lot. Okay, I'm going to some live questions now. The first is from Karen Herr. Karen wants to know, how can we ensure that after we get our representatives elected, that they are able to have power in their legislative bodies? Who wants to take that? Charlene, can you handle that one?
I'm not fully clear on the question. So that the individual that won the election, or so that us as the people? It was my question.
It's really about the person who's been elected. How can we help that person activate power in the legislative body of which they're a part?
I believe that that's why civic engagement work is year-round, right? And that we stay in relationship with the newly elected individual, but we're also branching out and are part of organizations that are in relationship with people in other realms across the state in order to make sure that they can be the most effective individual possible, because it takes a connection of relationships. If you're in the state legislature, there are other people there that we need votes for in order to pass the things that we want. If you are local government, we might need the council plus, half the council plus one on board. So we need to just make sure that we're talking to more than just them, and that we become thought partners because we're in close relationship with them.
Thanks a lot. Okay, this is for Ajin. How do you organize a disenfranchised community?
The one thing to know is that every community is organized in their own ways, and domestic workers, because they're so isolated, have formed really strong networks. And so it's about really trying to tap into those. And every community is different. And so for domestic workers, for example, when I first started organizing, I went from playground to playground because I saw the nannies taking the kids to the playgrounds to play and hanging out together on park benches and or transportation hubs. Oftentimes, domestic workers are in neighborhoods where they live, getting on the train to go to neighborhoods where they work at certain hours of the day, and you can find people and talk to them there. Deanna would know in New Jersey the best places, but I would say to think about how to tap into grassroots and organic networks that already exist, and oftentimes they're faith-based communities, which Charlene can speak to. They're very powerful networks within every faith community where working class people are, and we often tap into those as well in our organizing.
Okay, that was good.
I would like to also say we need to be clear who the organizer is, and it's just an instrument. Communities, the organizer is a facilitator basically of that process. So to organize a disfranchised community, we really need to be open to listening of that community needs and be open to be guided by the community about what issues you're going to work on. And I say, you say, right. Example of New Jersey. So we're working to pass the values out because the community wants that. The community don't want collaboration between police and ICE, and we need to stop that. We need expanding the right to vote for people, so that way people in the community, in the local communities, they can vote for local government. So it's important to understand, have clear understanding who are the organizer, who is an activist, what about mobilizing, who is a leader, and our role is organizer is promote leadership in our communities, so that way that community can lead their own fight for justice.
Very good, very good. I want to ask this last question from the live audience to both Charlene and to Ai-jen, and it goes like this. How do you create the sense of urgency in communities about how important their vote is and to get out and vote? Charlene, you want to go first?
I believe, and this also piggybacks a little bit off of the last question, the best organizing and the most powerful organizing is in relationship. We're relational organizers, right? It's through deep relationship where we understand each other's needs and wants and what drives us and what our values are that moves us to act around anything. And the same is true when it comes to our vote. Like, I go out to vote because there's a set of things that I am very moved for that are going to deeply impact me, my family, and those that I love. That is what moves me to actually go out and to cast my ballot when I know that there's somebody that is aligned with the things that are important to me. And I'm in conversation with those people, making sure that you're going to deliver on the things that I want. And that's part of organizing, is putting people in conversation with those individuals to make sure that they understand that that's what the urgency is. It's around XYZ, whatever it is, such as gun violence, which is something that I'm really extremely passionate about. So like this year, I'm voting around whether or not we are going to fund hospital-based gun violence prevention programs and on-the-ground community-based violence programs. That is what I am going to move a huge set of people around. So figure out what those things are and then let them lead.
That's good to know. All right, Ai-jen, anything you want to add?
I would just also add that we can oftentimes point to things that have made a difference, policies that have passed. The American Rescue Plan did a huge amount to stabilize people in crisis, and that happened because a lot of us showed up to vote. and making the connections between elections and the policy that has resulted.
All right, okay. Unfortunately, that's about all the time we have for tonight's discussion. Please join me, everyone, in thanking our panelists, Deanna Mejia, Charlene D. Walker, and I-Jen Poo. It has been such a powerful and important conversation, full of actionable advice on how to advance the movement for equity and justice. Thank you all. I want to take this opportunity to highlight some of the key points and policy recommendations made by our speakers tonight. First and foremost, despite its progressive reputation, New Jersey has a long way to go to ensure engagement and participation from all. This movement needs involvement from all of us, the public sector, the private sector, nonprofits, and residents, to build political power of the most impacted. As our panelists mentioned, policymaking is one way to address this issue, from passing the Values Act and the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights to supporting same-day voter registration. We heard a number of possible policy solutions that can help shift power into the hands of the least represented but most impacted communities in our state. Wind of the Spirit and the National Domestic Workers Alliance also encourage us to support the passage of both the New Jersey and the Federal Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. Finally, get involved with one of tonight's organizations or a grassroots organization advocating for equal representation and participation in your community. I want to thank you again for being part of this important discussion. This has been an unbelievably valuable experience for me and for the Fund for New Jersey. I now turn back to Kiki Jameson, the Fund's president.
Thank you, Richard. This has been a really powerful and enlightening conversation. I'd like to thank our moderator and board chair, Richard W. Roper, and our panelists, I-Jen Poo, Deanna Mejia, and Charlene D. Walker. And we'd also like to give a huge thanks to Deanna and Charlene and their many colleagues for all the work they've done to make life better for people in New Jersey, including really historic wins and historic achievements, particularly in this time of the COVID pandemic, helping people to return to their communities, to be safe in their work environments, and to be given access to healthcare so needed. I'd also like to recognize all of our partners and co-sponsors, without whom this event and the entire series would not have been possible. I hope that you enjoyed this Imagine More series and are inspired to get involved. Next week, you will receive an email with resources, including all the links in the chat and information to help you drive change in your communities. We've made some important gains in New Jersey, thanks to the organizing, advocacy, and coalition building of the organizations that you've heard from throughout this series. But there is still so much more work to do in our state. We encourage you to connect with these organizations and to get involved. Movements create change, and movements need people. Join us and become part of this movement to imagine more for the people of New Jersey. To access all session resources as well as recordings, you can visit the website www.imaginemorenj.org. Thank you all again for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.